Welcome to the University of the Free State.
Waamohela ho University of the Free State.
Welkom bij de Universiteit van die Vrystaat.
Siyakwamukela eNyuvesi yase-Free State.
Situated in the heart of South Africa, my university is a creation of the past, the present, and the future. Across our 3 campuses, 7 faculties have been home to some of the most magnificent minds. Everything we do is rooted in our values of excellence, innovation and impact, accountability, care, social justice, and sustainability. We have been changing the world for more than a century. We continue to pave the way and inspire a fresh stream of knowledge and skill to follow in the footsteps of our scholars and alumni. We hunger for knowledge that will help us to be better and to do better. Our facilities encourage excellence, pulling us towards the light of new insight and ways of applying what we know. We lead by example, advocating sustainability in everything that we do. While we are making a current impact, we are also steering towards the future with the knowledge and skills we need to take the lead. The next years will be especially significant in our growth as our Vision 130 unfolds, which will peak in 2034 when the University of the Free State celebrates 130 years of existence. Vision 130 is our strategic intent to reposition the university for 2034. Join us on this journey. Together, we will go further.
Sanibona, Molo, Molweni, Hwemore, Absheni, My name is Lesila Mtaung. I come from the Academy for Multilingualism. I'll be the program director for today. It's so beautiful in Bloemfontein. The weather has allowed us to be here and so that we can witness these beautiful faces that we have today. Without any further ado, because I can see when you look at time, our program is supposed to kickstart at exactly 9 o'clock, but we had to do some arrangements so that people that were traveling from another campus can come through. But they're all here, and then I think we are ready to start. So that we are able to start on a very high note, I would like to welcome on stage our colleagues or students that will render us a poetry. The names are Tebogo and Mngweno Mngandu.
Kutsho khona ikhono kuhamba kakuhle ngoba azikhonkothe engadumiyo hambe qine ubuyokwazi njani xa ungazamanga
Bafihlile basahane maparakobo bafihlile sentse bathintsetsa ba re ha ba fihla ba re tsokotsane ke seo athe se tsokotsane ke ha ba tsokotsa metsodi ba re yaka e ka tokosela talega
kwilwimi ngelwimi zezwe lokhokho bethu kwimibala ngemibala yenkangeleko yabantu bethu kubuhle bokuqhakaza kweAfrika ndithi xa umbona umXhosa umjonga umsuthu uyawubona ukuthi apha siyinzalelwane yalowo mhlaba
Gwele la qoba ba re ya falla ganyapa the se ganyapa ke Basotho se ba fihlile ba re bana mmala bona dikobo ha se fihlile ke mmala e fapane e tshwanetse hantle ho bona ba gaba sekapi koko e gaba ka masiba a thibe ikgantshetsa bona
kuxa simqhelo omnye ukuloyisa utshaba lethu kuxa sihlangene ngolhlobo siqhense kube nzima noba bangene ngaphakathi kwethu
na nka fetoha marangrang ka fetoha matarapane ka nka fetoha motho wa o tswere pana matsweri pakeng na nka fetoha ha ke etsetswe ditlatse nna ke motho wa ipusang ke Mosotho ke kgabane ke Mosotho ke kgeleke nna ke re ha ke ratanka
Kubeva bethetha ngoAfrika zuthulumamele ukhonjiswa thina uzukhawuleza uvula amehlo ukhangele ngoba asigexi asishenci asibhekabheki asingomabhetshebhetshe ndatsho ndakhumbula ixhego lam lisithi nyanam eli ayilozwele enkenenkene lo ngumhlaba weAfrika Tamako
Thank you for that powerful rendition. I think we are now getting to start. We haven't started. Before we start, we need someone to come and welcome us in this institution. And to do that, I'll call on the podium Dr. Tolani Hlongwa, who's the Deputy Director in the Academy for Multilingualism. Dr. Hlongwa, please give her a round of applause as she walks up on the stage.
Sanbonani. Dumelang. Good morning. Goeiemorgen. My name is Tolani Hlongwa. Abanye bangazi ngomagabhisi uMashozi, uMamdumasela, uMagidela, uMambasha. Intombi ehla ngomzungulo asala wabola. I'm standing here this morning to offer you, who are here in this room, and those who are watching today's event online, special greetings and a very warm welcome to our inaugural of our UFS Language Policy Indaba Forum. I would like to recognize the presence of all the UFS students who are here today, all academic staff members, all professional staff members and support staff members. I wish to also recognize the presence of the UFS Student Council representative who are with us today. And in our midst, we have a special guest who has graced us with his presence all the way from the province of the Western Cape. We welcome you, Professor. We also have our panelists who have also graced us with their presence and contributions they will make during the proceedings of today. We welcome you all. I cannot leave this podium without recognizing the Academy for Multilingualism team that has been working tirelessly to ensure that the event of this day is well coordinated under the leadership of Dr. Nomalungelo Ngubane, our captain. I welcome you, colleagues. I can never forget to recognize the presence of our ICT team that is making sure that those who could not make it to be physically with us today, they are also accommodated. In our culture, African culture, it is mandatory to also recognize our line manager, even though she is not here with us today. But she has blessed today's event with all her being, and that is Professor Anthea Roda in her absence. I do hope today's event will be the day we will always remember that while the University of the Free State has welcomed us all to come and study or work, but they go beyond and above, or above and beyond, that's English. By opening such opportunities for us to engage and have conversations on important matters such as our languages, which are given to us as tools to navigate this world we live in. We can now take off our shoes, stretch our toes, and enjoy the moment. Ngiyaleboha, ngiyabonga. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Klonga, for the warm welcome. You did not welcome me. It is always important to welcome the program director. All right, without any further ado, because now we are welcomed, now we need to know why we are here. And I can't do that. We have a special person who will come do that now. And without any further ado, I'll call on the podium Dr. Nomalungelo Ngubane, the director on the Academy for Multilingualism, to tell us the purpose and the background for this event. Over to you, Doc.
Bonani, Dumelang, Goeiemorgen, Molweni. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nomalungelo Ngubane. I am from the Academy for Multilingualism. I do join all the protocols established by Utogotela Uhlongwa. With that, I will also give a special greeting to our honorable keynote speaker. In absentia, a special greeting to our DVC academic, Professor Roda. She made sure that our keynote speaker has a warm welcome to the University of the Free State last night. We thank her for that. Our present, we have our esteemed professors from the faculties. We greet you. We have our esteemed directors from our sister unit, deputy directors, head of department around the 3 campuses of the University of the Free State. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome you all, especially our students. I think that they are the majority guests this morning. Thank you for taking time to come and attend this. I welcome you to this inaugural language policy Indaba 2025. This is a historic moment for the University of the Free State as well as the Academy for Multilingualism. Today we begin a collective journey to turn language policy into a living practice. So the purpose of the language policy Indaba is simple but very profound. It is to move from policy on paper to policy in action. Too often, language policy in higher education remain aspirational. Our task is to cultivate a culture of implementation, the one that transforms teaching and learning, enriches research, expands student access, and strengthen community engagement. We have learned from our great scholars in South Africa, the likes of Alexander, the likes of Professor Khala, Professor Meleketi Makalela, and many others that have shown us that language, especially language policies, are never neutral. They shape who participates, who succeeds, and whose knowledge counts in higher education. We know that monolingual practices closes the door for many of our students. By contrast, multilingualism and translanguaging pedagogies, they open doors wider. They affirm our students' identities and they deepen their learning. The University of the Free State is uniquely positioned for this work. We are located in a province where Sesotho, isiZulu, Afrikaans, and English converge. We are standing at the crossroads of South Africa's linguistic diversity. This is not a challenge for us. It is not a challenge to overcome. It is an intellectual resource to harness. We gather here today at a critical time where the DHET language policy requires universities to develop and intellectualize the African languages as academic languages. Globally, multilingualism is also increasingly recognized as a strength, not a burden. So today, we are here to critically reflect on our language policy. We are here to hear perspectives of our students, our academics, and our external stakeholders like PenSALP. Through this critical engagement, we hope to explore models of practice for the University of the Free State, from multilingual tutorials to language-enabled supervision and technologies. We hope that we will leave here with some recommendation that will guide us forward to sustainable and meaningful implementation. Colleagues, in closure, this Indaba is not the end of a process. It is the beginning for the University of the Free State, a beginning to transformative practices. If we succeed as the university, we stand tall as a leader in showing how multilingualism drives academic excellence, equity, and social justice. Let us remember, my language is not complete without your language. Our knowledge is diminished without diversity. In the spirit of Ubuntu, let this Indaba move us forward from words to action and from aspiration to lived experiences. I warmly welcome you all. I hope that that we'll all have successful engagement moving forward. I thank you all.
Powerful. All right. Thank you, Dr. Ngubane. That was powerful. It was really, really powerful, so that you remind us where we come from and the intention and the statement of intent that the institutions across South Africa and across the world, what is the intention or the commitment around the issues around multilingual diversity or the classrooms that we have at the moment, and the institutions at large, that they've come to be quite diverse. Others call them super diversity. You know, they name them a lot of words, but we know at the heart is how do you deal with that diversity within an institutional context. And thank you, Dr. Ngubane, for that. The next item on your program is that we'll call in Tlogelo and Tebogo to also give us a poetry rendition. Over to you.
I Dumelang bagaetshong ka dimeng ditsebe ke letsele kgankhutswe kana nna ga ke boke ke nene ke tsa ka puo ke mosetsana wa Motswana ke kokomane ya bakwena nna ka lina ke tlotlego ga sekatswe the representative of who I am, the image of myself. Africa, my roots, Africa, my pride. Oh, Africa, my motherland, a place so rich and gifted. Our nations full with diversity of cultures, culture of Banabamala Wasibilo. One voice can sing a song, but many choirs make a tongue strong. Ish, excuse guys, yo. Thank you. One voice can sing a song, but many tongues make a choir strong. Each language is a hidden key, unlocking doors of history. When I speak my mother's tongue, I feel her power within me. I feel the ancestral ground reminding me of who I am. I hear the voices of my ancestors reminding me of where I belong. When I speak another language, it's like singing the world from a different lane. It's like stepping into a new skin. It allows me to sit at one's table and taste their food, but not all words are spoken. Some emerge in silence grace. South African Sign Language moves through hands and gestures, painting beautiful stories in the air. It's It carries laughter and wisdom, just like any other word, adding its harmony to the nation's choir. To speak in many tongues is to hold power, not the one that conquers, but the one that unites us as people. Without language, stories are lost. Nations forget their heartbeat. People lose their roots. Oh, language. What a beautiful concept. Thank you.
My goodness. Oh, okay. Maybe I can challenge you, but not today. That was powerful. She says that languages hold powers that unite. Stories sometimes get lost, and people lose themselves. I won't go further on that one. Without any further ado, after this powerful poetry rendition, I would like to invite Professor Susan from the English department, from the Faculty of Humanities, to introduce the keynote speaker for today. With a warm round of applause, colleagues, as she walks towards the podium.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that warm introduction and the beautiful poetry. You know, before I introduce the professor, I think it's not surprising that one feels emotional, because it's not just words, right? And we feel it in us, deep inside our very essence. So it's touching. It should touch all of our hearts. So welcome to all of you. It is with a lot of pleasure that I introduce our esteemed guest today. And let me just go off script a bit here to say that the professor has roots to our university, having been a doctoral student here, which is something that I did not know. So you learn something every day. So Professor Monwabisi Kgalagala is a professor and deputy vice-chancellor academic at the University of the Western Cape. Aside from being a Canon Collins Educational and Legal Assistance Trust alumnus, the professor is the 2017 recipient of the Neville Alexander Award for the promotion of multilingualism. His research interests are very diverse, but follow three distinct lines: language rights and multilingualism in higher education, forensic linguistics, and translation studies. He has also published books and articles, chapters, mainly in forensic linguistics, translation studies, and language policy in higher education. He has co-authored and co-edited books, too many to mention, so I'll have to take a deep breath here. But these include African Language and Language Practice Research in the 21st Century, Interdisciplinary Themes and Perspectives, New Frontiers in Forensic Linguistics, Themes and Perspectives in Language and Law in Africa and Beyond, Knowledge Beyond Colour Lines Towards Repurposing Knowledge Generation in South African Higher Education, a handbook on legal languages and the quest for linguistic equality in South Africa and beyond, Language and the Law, Global Perspectives in Forensic Linguistics from Africa and Beyond, Language, Crime and Courts in Contemporary Africa and Beyond, Unlocking the Chains of Knowledge, Understanding the Challenges, Remaking Pedagogies and Curriculum Renewal, published amongst others by African Sun Media. I could go on. Professor is the founder and chief series editor of Studies in Forensics and Legal Linguistics in Africa and Beyond, as well as the International Advisory Board member for the International Journal for the Semiotics of Law. He serves as chairperson to the newly formed African Association of Forensic and Legal Linguistics. Professor, we welcome you, and we welcome you back to the family. Thank you so much.
That's fine.
Quickly. I think that's
Right. I'm just reading the room. Prof. Suzanne, thank you very much for that comprehensive introduction on my behalf. And I must also acknowledge our program director, who has started already on a very high note, that Siyabong. I must say the environment does threaten me a bit, because as you correctly say, I'm a student of this university. So I'm not a stranger, but coming after quite a long time, it sort of does remind you of certain things, certain experiences, lived experiences when I was a student here. But thank you very much for inviting me. I just need to make some thank yous and acknowledgements just before I take off, so that I get those out of the way. And obviously I wish to acknowledge Prof. Roda, who's formed part of the leadership of the institution. Myself and Prof. Roda come a long way from UWC. And I was saying yesterday, jokingly, that the university is stealing from us, because the Deputy Dean of Humanities is from that university as well. The Dean of Theology is from that university, who served under me whilst there. So I think there's something good about UWC. So that's why you're stealing from us. I guess it's a good thing. So I wish to acknowledge her. But also, top of my list, I could also highlight that Prof. Masocha, who's the Dean of Humanities, is an important person that I value. So do pass my regards to him. I mean, even if he could not come through just to interact with me. I also have the leadership of the academy, Dr. Bane, and of course Dr. Hlongwa, for extending the invitation and kind of saw value in the work that we do in our space, especially in the language space. So we want to thank you for the invitation. I feel honored, I'm humbled. And of course, the person who was interacting with me, facilitating all the arrangements, it was not so easy because, the university is in a busy time. But I could, hide away, so I'm using this time to hide. So, yeah, just give my thanks. I think it's Evodia Metao. She did very well. And obviously, the university community represented here, my deepest, congratulations for filling up. I see the turnout is good, especially from the people who matter, the students. So that's another top of my list this morning. I also wish to acknowledge the panelists. I do understand that after my brief talk, there will be, some further engagement in terms of the language question, the complexities that we are grappling with, and the extent to which we are moving towards the implementation stage, and what you've made, Dr. Mbane, the emphasis on action. So that's what I want to talk about as well. So I should also make a point about the representation from faculties, colleagues who are not necessarily in the language space, but who see the need and the importance of language, the centrality of language in pedagogy and in other, academic-related activities who are here. So I wish to salute you. There is a tendency in some of our interaction that the language question is a humanities problem, which is not true. It is not a humanities problem. It is our problem. Whether you're in science, whether you're in law, and whether you are in dentistry or whatever domain, it is our problem. So it's everybody's problem. So I wish to say my thanks for those who really saw that and beginning to realize that we are all in this. So I could start. I'm not sure. Okay, we're good to go. Now, I've structured my talk in waves. I have this passion about waves. So the first wave deals directly with the lie of the land and the challenge of the language policy action and the implementation. I'll talk a little bit about that because it's a major challenge that we experience, not only in higher education, in other sectors. As you will notice, we have very interesting policies which are well formulated, well packaged, which is the first part of dealing with the problem. But moving to the next level, where we have to talk directly about the implementation and the strategies that must facilitate that implementation, then it becomes a challenge, a major challenge. And hence we realize that in some cases we talk about service delivery. We're not moving because it has everything to do with how we implement. I will talk about that a little bit and give you some ideas in terms of how to move beyond, the actual policy, which is the document that is in our hands. And then the second wave, I also want to offer some ideas. And Prof, you are an applied linguist. I'm in that space. So those of us who have studied linguistics, language practice, we would obviously know the importance of critical discourse analysis. So I'm a proponent of that, and I've been following through writing some of the works around critical discourse analysis and the extent to which it's used in dealing with some of these complex issues, including language policy implementation, and so on. So the dialectical reasoning is, an offshoot of critical discourse analysis, which is the third version of critical discourse analysis. And I will show that and give you some ideas as to how we could use it as a perspective, to expose some of the complexities that we are experiencing in our time in terms of language policy and language policy implementation. And the third wave, I will want to make some observations around a successful language policy implementation approach. And in this case, I'm tying that up with the fourth wave, where I'm putting out there a model that you can use if you are serious about language policy implementation. I've tested this in one of the universities. It has gained some traction, but not fully. But I will explain why not fully. So I'll get to that as well. And then right at the end, I will talk about re-energizing multilingualism in higher education. And colleague, you've mentioned this. We have a new framework. The very first one was promulgated in 2002. Now we have another one, which is also strange. We also need to measure, the road that we've traveled from that point to this point, and why are we introducing another framework? Because it's somewhat similar in terms of its content. So we'll talk about that a little bit. You've allocated me some time. I don't know if I will read the room. If people are getting a little bored, I will take my seat. I don't want to bore you. I just want to see that you're still following me as I speak. So maybe we should begin. Yeah, we should begin by do a quick analysis of the language profile. I think that's a very good, point to look at this stage. And if you look at the analysis, I'll give you just a few seconds to just go through with all the 4 censuses, starting with the very first one until you get to the very last, which is the 2022 one. And you might want to begin to think as to what does this mean in terms of multilingualism and the profile that we are grappling with in terms of the languages that are spoken widely in our society, in South Africa in particular. Okay, as you admire the numbers, I think it's very clear that the stats is revealing in that the 2022 census results show that African languages continue, and they obviously constitute a whopping 78%, 78.7% overall, which is the majority in this country in terms of the population distribution by language spoken in most South African households. I'm sure you are noticing that if you can pull that together. But if you go back and look at Table 1 in 1996, and look at Table 2 in 2001, and Table 3 in 2011, although it might be somewhat outdated by a little more than a decade, in terms of the South African language scenario, but the reality in 2022 probably does not seem to show a significant difference. Have you noticed that? So if you look at English across, you will see, the distribution. And if you look at other languages, you see some of the distribution. There are slight differences here and there. Now, and obviously, this is evidenced by the consistent over 70%, as you might like, the results which are representing the previously disadvantaged languages, which is African languages as we use this term, when you combine them. So it's over 70%, and this has been consistent over time. Now, further observations, if you like, isiZulu remained the most spoken language. I repeat this, isiZulu remained the most spoken language as per, the results. And it's followed by isiXhosa, as you can see. And then in the third place, you have Afrikaans. And of course, holding a third position, but not so far away from Sepedi. I mean, sitting at 10.0%. Now, it is also worth stating that the proportion of individuals who speak English, Xitsonga and Tshivenda, remain relatively stable. And you can see the stability there. And this seems to be the trend across all 4 censuses, if you read it correctly, while a noticeable downward trend is shown in speakers of Afrikaans. I'm sure you will notice that as well. There might be some reasons, that we can offer as to why this drop. I mean, from 14.5% in 1996, as you can see, to 10.6% in 2022. And isiXhosa from 17.9% in 1996 to 16.3% in 2022. Now, the findings also reveal that less than 1% of the population use sign language in both 2011 and 2022 census when combined. And I'm sure that's another interesting observation. Now, the point being made here is that although South Africans constituting close to 8% if you combine these numbers, are really representing, African languages or have an African language as their mother tongue or home language. I think there's a very interesting definition about this whole idea of home language if you look at these reports from these other schools. I read this with caution to say home language, first additional language. I get confused because your home language to me is the language that you speak at home in simple terms. But then when you turn the page, the home language becomes a different language. I'm not going to argue that. So while on the contrary, English and to a degree Afrikaans, constituting close to 19.3% as I combine them, continue to be in the center, in terms of the official domains, like you begin to think about the economic imperatives, the educational imperatives, and so on. So clearly, the reality of this situation is not sustainable, as you might have noticed in certain sectors, and has proven to be unbearable as the majority of the population whose English proficiency is low or non-existent. And I think it talks to some of the challenges that we experience about the whole project that talks to student success. We'll get to that. Okay, so are you clear about the lie of the land? This is where we are as a country. Okay. Now move to the second wave, and I want to talk about the issue that is very close to my heart. I'm in the process of putting together a theoretical framing. This is how I've pulled this together. And this work foregrounds, Folklore's work. They work together, husband and wife, Isabel Folklore and Norman Folklore. I'm sure you're familiar with Norman Folklore, but the wife is Isabel, so they are in the forefront of this. And this is the third version, but I've expanded the version to sort of take full ownership of this concept, which I could then apply in policy development, policy analysis, and policy implementation. Now, the silent contribution, I must say, of the proposed version as dialectical reasoning, which is CDA as dialectical reasoning, is its advocacy and its value and the importance that it attaches to the promotion of societal change. I will explain how this works, because we're talking social justice as well. I mean, the concept itself has social justice undertones. Now, this version views, discourse as a form of argument, or argumentation, if you like, and is involving practical argument, I think, because the fact that we have multilingualism in the space did not fall off the sky. There were deliberations. There were arguments, you see. There were debates. So it is within the spirit of such debates that you then come up with various options and decisions that are to be carried out. It's simple framework. It's a simple framework. You start with the problem, the critique, and you move on to the next level, which is the explanation, and then you then get to a point of making decisions. So that's the kind of logic that comes with it, as I'm attempting to explain it. So in other words, argumentation, grounds our decision in terms of the best options. And at this point, we are saying the best option, that we may have to pursue, and which is fully supported by government and the realities that we are grappling with, is multilingualism, because it's there. We cannot pretend that it does not exist. So the policies should kind of coincide and support that. I think that's the argument that we are putting forward. Now, in other words, the notion of normative and explanatory critique, as you can see, constitute a central part of the argumentation approach to political discourse, if you like. And I'm using policy analysis as a classic example here. And therefore, if you combine and underscore the relationship between critique and explanation, it paves the way to action. And I'll talk about that. I'll return to that point later. Now, what is of particular interest in the presentation here is the courage that has been galvanized through the analysis and evaluation of arguments. Because when the call was made by the minister, not the former minister, but the minister, Minister Nzimande, we were presented with clear instructions that as universities we must submit comments, right, in relation to the draft language framework. And we made those submissions. And what I did, I pulled these submissions through together, and this was sort of permitted by the Department of Higher Education. I also look at your submission. I'm now revealing. So, and I did an analysis of each submission, the comments. What were you saying in terms of your aspirations and desires when this whole instrument is finalized? So I use that instrument, to pick up on the element of critique, the element of explanation, and what possible actions you were pulling as the institution in relation to the whole framework as it stands. So that's what I did. So this thing came from that. So, the fundamental question, therefore, as advocated by practical argumentation approach, is to identify a political problem. So what I've discovered in those comments were language problems, political problems, right, that you are grappling with as institutions of higher learning. If I look at VETS, I look at UFS, I look at UCT, I look at UWC, there were some of the common, issues that were picked up in terms of the language question, right? That is a political problem. And we're talking now of a language problem. That's where the critique element comes in. So, in order for anyone to take a policy agenda forward, you need to identify the problem first. But you need to take a step further. Why are we having this problem? The circumstances surrounding this problem. Is it because we're teaching it in the language which is not originally ours? Is it because the students that we teach are not comfortable with English? Or is it because the knowledge can only be accessed in the medium of English? Or is it because better education could only be achieved through the medium of English? We need to be asking these questions because we want to get to the bottom of the problem. Why are we having this problem? Why are they not passing, up to the level that we sort of desire? Now, the good thing, I studied at Stellenbosch University for the longest time before I got here. Quite interestingly, if you were a student of law, engineering, medicine, you would have the option of responding to your question papers in Afrikaans, up to PhD. Now, today we have the best engineers, best legal minds who got their training at Stellenbosch through the language that they up to PhD. I'm talking about specialists, who are top specialists in this country. They were taught in the medium of Afrikaans. Now, you move to the next level, and as I was, someone who's observant at the time, and you look at the performance, at some point you'll have to apply for bursaries, scholarship, based on excellence. Now these guys are getting distinctions now because they are studying through the medium of Afrikaans, you see. And we are here in the same university struggling to obtain 62%. If you're lucky, you'll get to 65%. If you're lucky, that's your best. And they are sitting in 80s. It's all stars. And you ask the question, is something wrong with me, or what's going on here? You see. So that was the test for me as a student, at Stellenbosch University. I saw this, I said, no, there's something wrong here. You see. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we need to get to the bottom of the problem. It could be that the interventions that we are putting together to resolve what we think is a problem is not a problem. You see what I'm trying to say? So you need to get to the bottom of the problem, understand the circumstances surrounding the problem and the cause of the problem, get to the bottom structure. Then you should then be in a position to come up with the correct instruments to deal with the problem. So that's what I observed. So for you to get to a viable solution and the actual action that is required for this to happen, so that would be the starting point. So that's what my model is suggesting. Let's get to that point first, and then we will then move, understanding that these are the right instruments. So that was my observation. But we don't run an extra mile as academics, as people who know better, to say, let's look at these various impediments. Yes, high impact mode. Yes, the language question. Yes, this and this and that. So, and I'm arguing about this because our perception of reality mediates through language. And if our command of a particular language, our understanding of that language, our knowledge of that language, our comprehension of that language is poor, it begins to say that our understanding of the world around us, conceptually, will also be poor. That's a simple explanation about it. Because our worldview is very much informed by the language that we speak and the language that we're comfortable with, language that we're good at. we master, as it is a channel through which we understand and comprehend things, concepts. But if that language is, then it also, put us in a serious predicament. I had the same experience visiting abroad, Germany in the East. There's a place called Leipzig. It's East Germany. They speak Deutsch. English at the time, because you come across these senior citizens in that country. And I couldn't speak an inch of that language. To move around and get to the shops and do all sorts of things that you would want to do, I felt so impoverished. You see. But that's the West. But bringing it back home, I think this is an important question that we need to look at very closely. So I'm sort of guided by this instrument in picking some of these things up, right? So what are we desiring as a future, situation, as a goal? So we obviously hypothesize that a set of policy proposals might assist in achieving the goal in order for us to move a step further, you see. But as I said, the preliminary step to figure it out what to do about the problem is critical. So unless you have an accurate understanding of the cause, why something is wrong, why something is happening the way it's happening, you will not be able to conceive a suitable solution. So we move on just to make a passing mention that we have these policies. They look good. They're sort of up to scratch. Our policy environment is great, as you can see. There's quite a number of them. But the bigger question, why are we struggling to implement them fully? I think that's the question that we may have to ask. The challenge of monolingualism versus multilingualism, it's haunting us. I've seen this in the criminal justice system because I operate, my research is in that space, but it's also in higher education. And I consider these problems, policy problems, as weak problems. They are weak because they are complex. That's why I call them weak problems. There might be a need to do a language audit. We need to go back to the people, to the communities, and ask them, what language would they prefer going forward? Okay. So I'm not going to waste too much of your time on this. You are familiar with these legislative, frameworks and so on. I think where I need to spend more time is on the cluster of explanatory variables or 7 protocol, which I think is very, very important when you're dealing with policy formulation and policy implementation. There has to be alignment. So I'll talk to each one of them so that you follow. You can even begin to think of the steps that you engaged when you're formulating your policy as an institution and the extent to which you've taken the policy to another level. So, I want to start with policy content. Problematizes the issue it's set out to do. How does it problematize it? Now you're getting to the point where you're looking at the causal theory. I spoke at length about the causes, right? You set out to do this because there are these challenges, you see, that are affecting our situation here. So that must be clear from the policy perspective. And then the other important part, which is a subcategory to the content, would be the methods. How do you intend to deal with these methodologically? The how part, that must come through as well, and we must be able to lift it if you talk about policy content. So that's very important on that. So that's a very important cluster, as part of the 7 protocol. So the second, which is also critical, is the context. So does this context warrant that we need a multilingual policy? What is the identity of this university? We need to understand that as we are looking at policy formulation. So the context is very critical. The identity of the institution, for example, the shape and size of the institution, and how does the university relate, to the social, the economical, and of course the legal realities, in practical terms, that you would want to propose this policy but not that policy. So that's very important. Perhaps we need to relook when we do the policy review that these items have been addressed. So that's why I spoke about understand the problem. These elements are part of understanding the problem, because without understanding the context of the University of the Free State, we will not be in a position to come up with a policy that will address the problems of the University of the Free State. So we need to understand that part first. So, context. The next one is the commitment. And a great number of policies have failed because of the lack of commitment on the part of those who are supposed to drive the policy agenda. Now, the commitment comes from different angles. You could horizontally and vertically. So, enabling environment, the leadership of the university, the people on the ground. Because if the students, as they did during the fees must fall, and they say to the executive, we want Setswana here, that will happen. So there has to be some degree of commitment across all the stakeholders, you see. So commitment is king when it comes to policy formulation and policy implementation. So I'm pulling these together, you see. So I want to emphasize that the reality of policy failure in a variety of sectors in South African context, not necessarily language policy, has been the order of the day. And this is as a result of the lack of commitment. And of course, you could look at commitment in various ways. It could be labeled as lack of awareness about why this policy, you see. That could be one way of looking at it. It could also be the lack of knowledge about the importance of policy. So that also falls under commitment. And of course, understanding the policy goals and policy objectives. So commitment is essential. We could also talk about the next C, which is capacity. Now, there's no point, for your institution to then endorse. I mean, universities work in committees, and these policies get approved from this committee to that committee, Senate and Council, if there's no capacity. You see, you wouldn't be, it's counterproductive. You need people to drive the agenda. You need the academy. I'm not so sure whether the academy is well capacitated in terms of staff, in terms of resources, and so on. But you need to do a good measurement and look at the university broadly and test that with the, the capacity that's required in terms of human resources, financial resources, and so on. But if you're lacking on the capacity element, you're not likely to go far with your implementation of policy. So in other words, the extent to which such resources are devised and brought to bear and put to good use in favor of a successful policy implementation should be considered as very, very critical if we are serious about policy implementation. The next one would be your clients and the beneficiaries, the people on the ground, the people who stand to benefit from the policy. And I can tell you the protocol is relevant, not necessarily in the language, but in other policies. So the people who stand to benefit from this must also be taken into account if the policy is to succeed in terms of its implementation. Otherwise, the lack of such support could potentially threaten, or deflect the implementation of such a policy. So you need the people to understand that. And of course, you need the coalitions. You can't do this alone as the University of the Free State. You need, for example, the Pan South African Language Board. These are the coalitions. You need the communities out there. A student population is a community. If we're talking about legitimate structures of students within a university, they are a community, they constitute a community. So you need those communities to sort of, all hands should be on deck, and that's your coalitions. Because if anyone is going the wrong way, you say, but this is what they want as a matter of policy. And we take it to the next level. Communication is another critical element that forms part of the protocol. So we have, and I looked at your policy, at least it's in 3 languages. So we have policies that are not understood by the implementers, but by the beneficiaries. They don't even understand a word. Policy text is problematic. It's a legal document. A policy is a legal document. So it does not help if you have it in one language and people don't understand what is contained in the policy because you've got the fine print. So to communicate policy in a language which people do not understand, it's a waste of time. Sometimes they read it, but they read it with no understanding. So there has to be a degree of understanding the actual meaning and the intention, the sense, and they should be in a position to interpret it. What is the meaning of this policy, in terms of the university administration, this and this and that. So that's another important element that's linked to the 7 protocol. The last, which I think is important, is the coordination. So as I've spoken about the 7 C's. So this is the last. I hope you're still awake. Are you still awake? You just tell if you want me to sit down, just raise your hand. I'll take my seat. So the academy is doing the coordination work. Now, the coordination work is central to policy implementation. But it is worth emphasizing that if the coordination is not linked to the other C's, as I've explained them, again, it becomes a waste of time, right? If you're coordinating something which is not well resourced, there's no capacity, right? Then you might as well go home because you need the resources, you need humans to drive the agenda, you need the funds to take it forward. So these variables, they work hand in hand. So if one or two of these variables, the wheels are not well greased, the car will not move, swiftly. So the wheels must be fully greased across. So that's how it works. Okay. So let me move on. But I think you're clear on that front. Okay. Am I doing well with time? Happy? Okay. All right. Now, I need you to connect the 7 protocol, that's where my model works, with those variables. Now, what I do, I look at, as you are busy formulating a policy, taking into account the 7 protocols and the variables. Now, you get to a point of saying, now, all of these are fulfilled, right? You want to move to a point of implementing now, and you identify the university as an example. So in this instance, I'm looking at the symbolic imperatives. And a classic example of this is signage, which forms part of my model. That if you begin to think about implementing, you need to plug in the symbolic imperative, and that signage is sitting in the center of that. And I see in some cases it is happening. Right. So that is the very first area that you might want to look at. Okay. And then you move on and talk about the ceremonial imperative. And again, this is a simple, but you also need to bring in some degree of support, how you manage it. Hence, I spoke about the commitment. If at your graduation ceremony, for example, you have sign language, which I think is necessary because it's a selling point for the university, that's number one. But 2, you have people graduating who might not follow the proceedings, and they form part of your university community because their children are here. Or you have children who are here, or students who are here, who may not benefit, you see. So that is, in a way, multilingualism at work. So that's the second element that is very critical. You sort of structure them nicely. And you could also use your inaugural lectures and other big events. And this event, it's also appreciated that you have sign language in action. So this is the kind of example that I'm referring to. And you could also, as another important imperative, introduce that specific policies should be in the language that people understand. Because I remember I said policy is a legal document. Now, from time to time, people are embroiled in, I don't want to say criminal activities, but in a university and anywhere, you have people who transgress. And there are hearings, there are cases, and obviously some of these cases, they end up at CCMA, they end up in court, but they need to, from the start, they need to be in a position to speak Setswana, and they need to understand the policy. So obviously some of the policies which are critical, you can start with those policies. That's part of implementation. Policies that are, it's not the fact that they need to be accessible to the people, so that when I'm getting ready to prepare for my hearing, I know what the policy says, right? So it's part of implementation. So you could, a sample of specific policies, you know, and if I'm dismissed from the institution, I know why, you know, I suffer that dismissal. So that's one example that one could apply. Now, coming to the bigger one, you know, the scientific or the academic imperative. Some time back, I worked with a number of colleagues in my university before UWC, where I started this project. And this is where the scientific and the academic imperative kicks in. So, and of course, institutions of higher learning were given this task, you know, regarding the implementation of the framework. And the project on multilingual glossaries was one of the key, you know, projects, fully funded through, in some cases, the grant, University Capacity Development Grant, and I took advantage of that as well. And I started with certain faculties, like Faculty of Informatics and Design, the Faculty of Law, Faculty of Applied Science, picking up on major complex terminology from those faculties. And I put together a group of students trying to understand from them, you know, in action, what is it that you know, is problematic for you to understand something. Immediately they said difficult terms. I said, let's get to those terms. Let's have a look at those terms. Bring them on. So the students were very keen, and we started the project of multilingual glossaries. And then, as part of that process, we then involved lecturers and subject specialists, linguists, professional translators, not just translators, sound translators. There's a difference there. You don't just invite someone because they have, you know, language combination that's relevant. They must be professional. You know what I'm talking about. And then you also, you know, need the support help to do the verification and the validation of such at the end of the day. So students were very excited about this project. And we started with architect technology. I'm going to show you some of the examples. And we had various stages that we followed as we were harvesting the data. So if you look at number one, we created a glossary list with the students. The students must be involved. This is their work. They must be involved. They must also be in the forefront of identifying the problematic terms, you know, which are not so easy to understand. So that's the one step. The second step, you give priority to a list, 100. And obviously the lecturers must be part of that, because from assessment, the lecturers are able to pick up that, on average, these 5 terms seem to be a problem in my class, you know, as I teach, as I assess, right? And then you move on to the translation of such priority list. And the translation must also have the input of the students. Remember, the song translators might be colleagues who come from a different generation altogether. Okay, Now, as I was interacting with some of the students at some stage, they have their own terms, meaning something else. You know, I mean, and you realize that, okay, this is the meaning, but it's not common in their space. But they understand it to mean this and this. So these are some of the things that you may want to pick up. And then you also have the in-house proofreading, because this work must also be subjected to quality assurance. I mean, that's very important. And then comes the verification workshop that we conducted with the guidance of the Pan South African Language Board and other coalitions. Remember, if you go back to that thingy, you need the coalitions, right? You have your clients around you, and you have everybody, all hands on deck. So it's now moving. And then you'd have your multilingual glossary list online. So what we then did was to say, for instance, here we're dealing with architect. So they also provide sketches. These sketches were done by the students themselves. So if you look at the first one, I'm just going to, because we also plugged in some audio, right? And then there was a dedicated website where you plug in all of these things so that
Rousteen, ongebakte bousteen, effens groter as normale bakstene, gemaak van klam, kleierige grond, gewoonlik met kaf of strooi gemeng, wat in die son gedroog word.
Isidena sodaka, isidena esingatshiswanga, esomiswe elangeni.
Paadjie of sybeek. 'n Paadjie is 'n ruimte tussen vaste elemente, byvoorbeeld 2 rye stoele in 'n kerk of fliek. 'n Sybeek is 'n ruimte aan weerskante van die sentrale beek of middeskip van 'n kerk.
Iayile, indawo yokuhamba phakathi kweentsika zesakhiwo okanye kwezitulo.
Spitsdak of nokpunt. Die hoogste deel van 'n dak. Dit is gewoonlik gelyk met die boonste rand van die dak of nok.
Incochoyi, eyona ndawo iphakamileyo yophahla, umqolo wophahla.
Yeah. So, now this is a resource as part of implementing your language policy. Now, there are various spin-offs that are attached to this for students to benefit and access the knowledge. The very first spin-off is that you are putting together new knowledge because it comes now in a different language. You wouldn't really, access that in the medium of isiXhosa. But what we are also saying, we are saying as you teach, as a lecturer or as a professor, this resource must be available so that if they are not able to understand the English, which is the original, description, they can have the choice of moving between English, Afrikaans if they are Afrikaans speakers, or isiXhosa if they are isiXhosa speakers. So it does assist also as a professor, if you teach, possibly you're not, a Xhosa speaker, for example, but you're also benefiting from this as you teach, because you will know for sure that this is the meaning which is linked, and it sort of covers you as someone who is either bilingual or monolingual. So you have a classroom which is vibrant, multilingual, pedagogies, if you like. And there's activity in the classroom because you have these terms which are very problematic. And it's readily available on the website, and students can then begin to tap into it. And also, as they manage their assignments, or preparing for their exams, they have this additional resource. At no point, because we're not ready, at no point I've argued that we should do away with English. I wouldn't say that. But I'm saying the students must be given a choice and an additional resource so that they achieve, so that they succeed, and so that they do very well, like students who could then manage this if they were to be taught in the language that they speak. We have to start somewhere. So these are some of the interventions. So if I can just summarize it to say the potential, or rather the spin-offs, as I've mentioned earlier, related to this exercise, as a scientific academic imperative, you're also benefiting from the interface between language and technology. Because for now, you sort of interacting with technology. In nowadays, you could even take it further and bring in AI and test if AI can pick up on some of these voiceovers, you see. That could also work, because AI would respond, the responses that we get are from the English language. But if we test it, for example, in Setswana, in Sexhosa, and there's no feedback, the students themselves can begin to develop these terminologies, and within no time, AI will be responding in Setswana. So you have those kind of mutually beneficiary exercise as a way of developing new knowledge, I think. So secondly, there are also benefits connected to this developmental initiative that are linked to the visual communication. Some of these things, some of us who are very keen to follow semiotics, you see, once you see a structure, then you are able to give a description, and imagine things. So that example, it's clear because this was done by the students, and they put together very nice sketches because these form part of their textbooks. So then the description comes later. So you also have that benefit. And again, it fosters multilingualism and multilingual practices, you see. And I dare to say the right discourse. Now you give them a choice. Whether that they use that choice to their benefit or not, that's not your problem. You will have done your part as an agent of change in the classroom or in the lecture hall. So that's what it means. Now for me, these audiovisuals and obviously are not only likely to appeal to students, I must say, but they enhance their comprehension, and of course the elements that derive from the different worldviews, as we are saying this when I started. So I need to move on.
Bousteen. Ongebakte bousteen. Effens groter as normale bak.
Right. Okay, so now we have this framework. Now, if you access the old framework, which was released in 2002, and compare that with this new framework, you realize that it's somewhat similar in terms of its objectives. Now, you ask the question, what is it that we have achieved, from that time to date? Because we're talking over 20 years now. I'm not going to entertain that. I'm not going to entertain that, but it's an irony. Okay. The one intervention that I think is also critical for us Amina spoke of coalitions and partners, is open access as an intervention. With this type of work, I mean, I know universities are very particular with copyright. I mean, I do understand that Stellenbosch is doing something somewhat similar. UCT is doing something similar. You also have UNISA doing something similar. But in order for us to have a well-coordinated project which could benefit students across the board, across universities, we could also pick up from each other. If we're doing, glossaries in law, for example, and UNISA, does something in education, we can exchange. Because there's a problem in terms of translation where students might end up, with inappropriate translations, and then knowledge flows in all sorts of directions. So I'm sort of very keen and advocating for open access to say if something is happening somewhere and this university can benefit from it, and also you do the same as a university, so it has to be a mutually beneficiary exercise. So that would be what I advocate as we move as higher education in terms of implementing multilingualism. We should be able to use these materials in a sustained way and benefit fully, from these materials. I think let me leave it at that. I've been preaching for, gosh. So this is my little story. If we are serious about multilingualism and sort of stand to benefit from it, if we follow this route. Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm sorry I took much longer, so yeah, okay.
No, you can plug it up. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. This was very practical presentation. A keynote address that shows you what is the problem, allows you to think even further about other things. But I'm not in a position to talk after the presentation. We have colleagues, as you can see on the program. Time is not a problem because I'm the program director. So we have people that will come forward and engage on what Professor Khalakhala has engaged us on and informed us on. And I'd like to call on here on the stage the following colleagues. Ntate Bishop Billy Boy Ramahlele from the Director from Community Engagement. He will sit from here. Please give him a round of applause. And then we have Dr. Florence Tadi, Senior Lecturer from the Department of Psychology. And then we have Dr. Michelle Joubert, who's the head of academic language and literacy development in the Center for Teaching and Learning. And then we have Ms. Homotso Sekonyane, who's the former Institutional Treasurer General. And then followed by Prof. Susan. We've seen her before. And then lastly, we have Ms. Nikiwe Matebula from Pensal. I'll shortly read the bios of the panelists that we have in front of us, starting with Bishop Biliboera Mahlele. Bishop currently works for the University of the Free State as the Director in the Community Engagement and serves as a member of the University Management Committee. Bishop Ramahlele serves as an executive member of South African Higher Education Community Engagement Forum. Since 1992, Bishop worked at the University of the Free State in different capacities, which include faculty officer, senior faculty officer, residence head, transformation officer, and director of Office of Diversity. In all these capacities, he was the first black person to hold such positions. He served at the university in different roles within its governance and management structures, and was also the chairperson of Institutional Forum. During the 1980s, he was part of the mass democratic movement and black leadership that engaged the University of the Free State to open its doors to the black community who were legally not allowed to study due to the apartheid laws. He spent his youth as a Christian activist within structures of the church, South African Council of Churches, and the non-governmental sector. Bishop was a high school teacher in Tabanchu, which he later left as there was a calling on his life to join full-time ministry. He was detained and assaulted several times by the Putatswana as well as South African police forces, compelled him to drop from ministry to work full-time in the service and mobilization of communities through community-based organizations. He received many awards and recognition for his role in the development of many communities, as well as for his role in the transformation of the University of the Free State from a monocultural to a multicultural university. Bishop is a bishop of charismatic church operating in 3 provinces of South Africa. He also serving as a member of the Executive Committee of South African Higher Education Community Engagement Forum. That's Bishop for you. And then we have 2023. She has received numerous academic awards and academic bursaries within and outside the university due to academic performance. She's a leader at heart who is passionate about transformational leadership and advocates for equity and empowerment with a set commitment and empowered. Her leadership journey within the university is as follows. 2022, she was PR and Marketing Director of Golden Key UFS Chapter. 23, Vice President of Golden Key UFS Chapter. 2023, again, first years in academics, House Imperium. 2024, Vice Prime, Discipline and Seniors, the same House Imperium. CSRC, Postgraduate Council. 2024-2025, ISRC, Treasurer General. And then we have the one for Prof. Susan. Prof. Susan is an Associate Professor of Applied Linguistics in the Department of English at the University of the Free State, as well as a researcher in the Interdisciplinary Center for Digital Futures at the university. Her research interest includes discourse analysis, digital humanities, and digital media discourse, and frame analysis. Her recent project pivot around the issue of trust in generative AI, as well as in trust in student-educator interactions mediated by this technology. She is an NRF-rated researcher, and in recent years she has researched discursive representations of emerging technologies in educational spaces and in the media with the likes of Prof. Edouard Kotze, Dr. Baggett, as co-authors. Her most recent work, AI in and for Africa, a humanistic perspective, was published in 2023 by the CRC Press, an imprint of Taylor and Francis Group. This is our prof here. Yeah, the bios can do you something. All right, the last one is Ms. Nekiuma Tebula. The current position is a Senior Provincial Manager of PenSouth in the Free State. She provides operational management, leadership, coordination of PenSouth African Language Board mandate at the provincial and the local level. She manages the implementation of programs to promote language use and research in the province and ensure administrative support to PenSouth structures such as Provincial Language Committee and the Sesotho National Language Body, and provides support for the development of language policies in the province. She's also responsible for the management of investigation of linguistic human rights violations and provision of advice, recommendation, directives thereon to any legislature or organ of state. She has been involved in the production of spelling and orthography rules of Sesotho National Language Body of 2019 and is also involved in the verification and authentication of various terminology projects of different government and academic institutions. She completed her master's degree in language management at the University of the Free State. She received accolades for her performance. She was a lecturer of linguistics and South African Sign Language, as well as a moderator of Sesotho courses at University of the Free State. She was a co-supervisor of master's thesis at CUT, Central University of Technology. She's an advisory board member of Central University of Technology, Department of Communication Sciences. That is Mr. So because I've read these bios, right? So they're very heavy, quite, and I forgot mine. But for now, I'll not read it. But what we are going to do next is for colleagues really that are sitting in front of us now to really look at how do we frame the discussions of language policies as a problem of implementation. I think this came out very heavily from Prof. Kgalagala's keynote. From their perspectives, what are the biggest barriers from moving from policy as a text to policy as a practice in our context, and how multilingualism may be leveraged to overcome these challenges. And for our first respondent, from the program, right, would have 3 to 5 minutes by the bishop, who will be responding to the question around on community engagement and societal impact. In this case, we're actually looking at how universities are tasked within the serving of the communities or their communities from which they're located, as much as their students, and resources that the UFS could adopt to cultivate and make sure that multilingualism is promoted as a lived and a practiced culture in the areas of community engagement, and between how universities can really link with the communities they serve. Without any further or wasting any more time, I will give Ndate Bishop Ramahlele a place to now talk. Over to you, Bishop.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies, ladies and gentlemen. It is not usually a norm that a bishop only speaks for 3 minutes. Okay, I'm going to deal with a topic on which is formulated around the university's conception of engaged scholarship, assuming that some of you may be exposed to the policy of university, wherein the university has committed itself that through scholarship and its intellectual resources will work with the communities to impact society positively. And I'll be looking at how language can help the university to reach that mission. As all of us are aware that universities by their nature are discriminatory. They are elitist. They were never established to be accessible by ordinary people. And part of what we call transformation is driven by the concept of access. And access normally is being discussed at student level with your how much you achieved in metric. But hardly do we look at how language can make the university accessible or not. And I'm glad that the keynote speaker did allude to the power that language can have in making education accessible. But this time I'm not just going to look at education, but the university as an institution accessible. And we, normally university people are referred to as academic and intellectual people operating and using language that is accessible. I mean, that is highly pitched. And sometimes the kind of language, not the language, but the kind of language and how we use language can also exclude people. The communities that we work with and partner with are highly intellectual, but they are not educated in the sense of how university defines education. And if we do not make sure that the manner in which we approach our policy in terms of language, to make sure that when we work with communities, we approach them and use language that is accessible. And what is accessible language is the simple use of language. The second thing is also, and this is based on my experience of having worked at the university for at least 35 years. It's how we were grown up and how language has been used as a political instrument to actually divide, exclude people. And this happens many a times, even when we work in communities, that we come with terminologies that are not accessible. And maybe the keynote speaker may share that even in court situations, there are people who lose cases, not because they were wrong, but because the interpretation that was given by the interpreter to those who make decisions was not accurate. So language plays a critical role. But important for the student body who is interacting with communities that we serve is the whole notion of understanding that communities we serve are themselves diverse and multicultural. And we need, as a university within our language policy, make sure that we prepare our students who are going to operate in languages not necessarily that they were trained in. So meaning, if a university like ours, which is operating in 5+1 languages, we must make sure that we empower every one of our students to be able to learn those 5+1. It does not have to happen in a classroom, but we need to create platforms where students can learn. In other words, what I'm saying, it is disingenuous that one studies at the University of the Free State where there's about 5 languages, but when you leave, you can only operate in one. So you are half educated. So we need to broaden how we use language to empower our students. Let me just close by making an example. Before 1993, when the University of Free State became parallel medium, the only language was Afrikaans, and those who were operating, who were not African speakers, could not access education. Around 1996, and in 1993, we introduced parallel medium. But around 1996, something very interesting happened that I want you to take home. As we're integrating students, creating a united student body, students who were operating in Afrikaans did not even want to communicate in English, even though they could. Students who were black, coming from English education background, but who could understand Afrikaans, did not want to use Afrikaans. So I was always the mediator between the two. But interesting enough, 5 years down the line, I went to UK, and I had to meet with some of our alumni who studied here in those areas. Those who did not want to operate in English found themselves in UK speaking only English, and the university never prepared them. So I want to make my closing remarks to say that as the university, we may have a policy that says tuition must happen in particular languages, but we need to create platforms wherein our students can be exposed and empowered to operate in more than one languages, because the communities we are going to serve are not necessarily in English, in Afrikaans, in Sesotho, but they may be in other languages. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Bishop. And it was very strategic that we start with you. Without wasting more time, we'd like Dr. Tadi, she will comment on the classroom practices, Prof. That you said it's big when I was sitting there, on classroom practices and pedagogy, and there talk about language policies which remain often aspirational documents. What are some of the classroom strategies and resources could the University of the Free State adopt to cultivate and promote multilingualism as a lived and a practiced culture within the areas of teaching and learning, not just that you're talking about multilingualism only as a text? Dr. Tadi?
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for the invite. I have shared my sentiments in our previous engagement, how I have fallen in love with multilingualism directorate. So every time I get the invitation from that directorate, I feel home. Yeah. And thank you so much for the students, to Prof, a very interesting, insightful presentation, very relevant. We appreciate that one. And I thought you start by the bishop, he's gonna start praying, but he missed that one. And I hope whatever I'm gonna start with, people are gonna start thinking I'm gonna preach. My love for language is always driven by the power of death and life. It's in the tongue. And every time I reflect on the monolingual, setup of academia, I always ask myself how much harm we have caused to our students because we cut their tongue. And that is why when I was invited to be part of, contribution to the multilingual directorate, I realized that it's important that we start doing surgery, reconnecting our students with their tongue, because the strength is in your tongue. I love idioms, they always inspire me. And there's always an African expression that says, language is treasure. Language is wisdom. Try to track anyone's wisdom. It's how she or he expresses himself, particularly in this oral tongue. So I am always delighted with any engagement or project from the Multilingual Directorate because we are doing that. And I need to acknowledge what you have done as a directorate, and that is why I'm not going to repeat that and really come up with more practical, things that I am attempting in my classes, particularly to reconnect students with their tongue. Because things like terminology development is one of the vehicles, and I think the directorate has done a lot. We have done that in accounting, in psychology, in social work. We have done a good job. The tutorials, most of them are run or are really facilitated through the use of translingualism. So I wouldn't really want to comment on that, but I will share my own experiences. And my experiences are always driven by students' reflection. I always share my clinical experience as a psychologist also. I always tell students that, the last 3 minutes of your session is actually the core therapy. The whole 45 minutes, stories have been said, the last 3 minutes, or just 2 minutes after the session. And I have also used that with my students, the after talk after the class. When students come back and say, Dr. Daddy, can you speak Afrikaans? And by just saying, now is the end, guys, I'm on Skuldag and on Slaan. And they, do you know Afrikaans? I say, yes, that will be after the class. Now they connect with these Afrikaans-speaking students. And say, maar doctor, ek sukkel met dit. I say, what do you struggle with? Say it in Afrikaans, I'll say it in English. And we start engaging. And students start saying, thank you very much. I think I understand this much better than what you were saying in the class. It's language. And that's why I say, just saying something that someone can connect. Imagine you have a class for 2 hours, but the students got stuck with on Skuldag and on Slaan, when you end up your class and say, I'm going home now. And they just connect with that and say, I'm going to talk more with this person. So it's always interesting when you connect with that students on that level. Another important thing, whatever we're teaching, I think Bishop has alluded is, we need to always ask the relevance of what we are teaching to our students. In psychology, we have a chapter on personality. It starts with defining what personality is. And English will have almost 8 words for personality. And I'll go back to the students and ask them, when you ask someone's personality, what do you say? And Sesotho people say, Kibotsa botho ba hae. And my question comes back, why do I have to teach them this 9 definition of personality? When the community that they are going to serve, they're going to ask, botho ba hao ke bofe? And the question will always be, because we'll even want to assess students on those things. Because therefore, we need to start learning that one concept is enough. Why do they have to know all this? And we assess all this, but they are not implementing. Having said I use my students a lot, I was sitting with the other one in supervision, and I asked her, how did you ask the patient this that you are saying? And she said, yo, doctor, I must be honest, I didn't ask. It's when you take history of a client, we always ask, what are the history of illnesses? And I asked her, umubudisa okila twas. Are you doctor? I don't think so. I said, let's be honest, you didn't. Because we have never taught you the importance. Because that's that's also family history to us. It's not a case. It's a family history. There are people who are suffering with diabetes. But why can't we ask them? Why? Because they don't have terminology. And the question becomes, how fair are we then for our communities? I was telling one student and say, you know what, you can't treat a patient when you don't understand what's the real problem. How did you ask the problem? In English. I say from now onwards, you are English speaking. You're going to ask that patient to write a problem in Sesotho, and you work together with her to translate. Because this is how you're going to get deep into whatever the patient is struggling with. And these are just innovative way of making students comfortable with our languages and not to maintain the monolingual, approach of teaching and learning. I sit with my students during supervision on thesis and dissertation writing, and I'll be saying, what are you saying? And it's a doctor, I don't know what I'm saying. I say, now you don't understand. What about the reader who's going to read your thesis? And I say, let's talk.
Or learning resources, such as key terms, glossaries, and summaries in the main campus languages. Dr. Hlongo, I think you guys invited me not so long ago when you were officially launching and handing over the terms, yes, of the psychology students, where they get to, understand terms in their native languages as well. So such mechanisms would reduce many barriers for many first-generation students and strengthen their academic confidence. Say, for instance, now I'm a law student, right? I did say that I'll make practical examples. I'm a law student. I come from home, a first-generation student. I was raised primarily by my grandmother, right? I come in class one day, they're talking about prescription of debt. They come with a maxim that debt does not prescribe. The first thing that comes into my mind, I hear the word prescribe, my mind goes haywire, right? I've heard of a doctor saying, oh, they'll prescribe medicine for me, so maybe prescribe is used in that context, right? But when someone translates it into my home language, I get to understand that, oh no, my grandmother once said, "Mulatu hauboli." I now understand it better, right? So it's mechanisms like that as well that also make first-generation students feel more included in the university space and also enhances their academic excellence as well, which is one of the founding values of our institution, right? So thirdly, we're now moving on to the third proposed solution, and this is informed by what Prof was saying when he was delivering his keynote address. He said that students fail from time to time, and I picked that up, that why are students failing from time to time, right? And this then informs my answer that fair and language-sensitive assessment within our university spaces is critical. Just yesterday, I was sitting with a colleague of mine who was marking papers, and a student, instead of saying familiarization, they said familiarization. Lecturers in the law faculty, the strict ones, we know, usually they'll mark you wrong, right? And this is also coming from the maxims. We have Latin maxims in the law faculty. If you get one word wrong, it loses the whole meaning of the maxim, right? So students should, from my stance, I believe that students should be evaluated primarily on the depth of their ideas and arguments rather than get penalized for linguistic slips. This does not lower the teaching standards, but rather recognizes the difference between language proficiency and intellectual capability. And this also then comes to what Bishop was saying, that oftentimes we're taught what we are taught in the classrooms, but when we go to the community, it's something different, right? I come into a classroom in the law faculty and they're teaching me about the audi alteram patem, but I get a job at Legal Aid and I need to go for community engagement. I need to explain that to Me Florence, who unfortunately did not get quality education during the apartheid era. I need to explain to her what the Latin maxim means in her native language. So perhaps we should then start viewing it from that perspective. And then also, we should look beyond the classroom. Visible multilingualism in campus communication and signage would enhance belonging in our student community. When students see their languages equally represented, it affirms that the institution really values their identity. And then lastly, lecturer modeling inclusivity. One thing that I please don't tell her, but I call our Prof Klopper, I call him Mama Action, because ever since he came into the university, that's all we've seen. We've seen action, right? One thing that I like about her, before she stands and delivers whatever address that she's going to deliver, she will greet us all in our native languages. So it's just like that, really. Through small but intentional gestures like greeting, sanbonani, dumelang, afsheni, jurise, things like that. And referencing really key terms across languages. As I did indicate that I come into a classroom, they teach me about the prescription of debt, I don't understand. But once someone says mulatu haubole, I fully understand that this is what my grandmother has been teaching me throughout my life. And then this also then signals that multilingualism is an asset in our student community and academic culture. And it is about time now that we then start seeing multilingualism as power, as the theme of the day really suggests. Thank you.
At least I'm not the one who was delivering the keynote. The Constitution is the problem. But globally, we regard it as one of the best. But someone says it is a problem. The problem comes from the legal document. Right? Section 29 on education, it says everyone has a right to receive education in the language of their choice. But you see, there's a caveat before they close it. They say, where it is reasonably practicable. I'll leave that. The Constitution is a problem. Without wasting any time, I'll move to Prof. Susan, who will reflect on research and knowledge production. How can multilingual approaches in research, whether in publication, knowledge dissemination, or knowledge co-production, co-learning, shift voices of those that are heard and valued within South African higher education? Over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much. I'm audible. Okay, well, before I begin, you should never have invited an applied linguist. Because for us, it's always a teachable moment. So I have to oppose one of your arguments about linguistic slips. Let me qualify. Dr. Jaban, I was speaking actually this morning about our students that we supervise and how lecturers get fixated on the linguistics and on the language. And we lose touch with the bigger picture, the organization, the structure, the argument. So I'm with you on that one. But let me just do a quick sidebar with linguistic slips. Many years ago, it was a Friday afternoon. I was working late, so my door was open. I was the only one there. And someone from a very large bank, one of the 5 banks, came and approached me. I was the only one there, so I had to take the question. Plonked a policy document down in front of me, and it dawned on me as he was explaining their linguistic dilemma that they did not want to pay out a customer for an insurance claim. And the linguistic question I was tasked with was, look at the document, and could you tell us who is correct in terms of interpretation of a sentence? And I had to tell them, I'm so sorry to tell you, you owe the client a lot of money. In one sentence, a comma is in the wrong place. So it's just an interesting, there are lots of examples around the world, by the way, of companies who pay out millions of dollars because of grammatical slips. So generally, they're not that important, but boy, when there's a slip up, it costs. Okay, there we go. There's the teacher coming out in me. She's now back in the box. Okay. So to answer the question, coming back to the Prof's very important message about commitment and capacity. And I think one of the challenges we have, and this is a global problem, we all do amazing projects. We're busy with all sorts of things. We're busy with multilingualism, but we actually don't know what other people are doing around the country. So we might be reinventing the wheel with what we do in terms of multilingualism when another university, online company platform is actually doing amazing work. So rather than living in our silos, we need to also find out what are other people doing around the country and at universities. So to come back to the topic now about multilingualism and promoting knowledge production in all our languages and getting it disseminated in journals, for example, at conferences, for example. I don't think I'd be worth my salt as a researcher if I didn't bring my own research into it, which is artificial intelligence. That's what I've been doing for many, many years now. So, yes, I know lecturers say, oh, don't use these machines, they're going to destroy us. And I myself am very skeptical about AI, and Although I researched it, I'm not a major proponent. We need to be skeptical. But here comes the but. We can use these amazing large language are severely underrepresented in those data sets. So it's really up to us at universities and everywhere to begin collecting that data. So there is an amazing platform, I would encourage you to go look at it, called Masakane. One of the co-founders was Professor Marivate, who I now know is a computer scientist at UP, one of the co-founders, and they translate research, all sorts of documents into our official languages. So that's what we need. What's wonderful about that is that you don't even need to be a data scientist. You can be anybody. You can join them, email them, and you can start collecting data on your languages. This is perhaps a bit of a sidebar because it's not academic, but one fantastic way to preserve and promote your language is to get onto Wikipedia and to add to it. That's the way, because that's the way our languages will continue to live. It's a very sobering thought to me that while I'm speaking about AI, the irony does not escape me that our languages are under digital threat. According to the United Nations, and this is a staggering figure, 97% of our languages globally are under threat because of the digital. That's enormous. I think one of the most definitive organizations I know that tracks languages in terms of living, dying, being stable, endangered or extinct is a company called Ethnologue. And in this country, it might surprise you to know that we actually have 20 indigenous languages. 2 are stable, 10 are used institutional level. By stable, I mean they're not used at university, but they're used in our communities and home. And that we now have 8 extinct languages. And another staggering thought, another United Nations statistic here, is that a language dies completely every 2 weeks. That's astounding. So I think I urge you as students to get on board. Contact us at the ICDF, which is the Centre for Interdisciplinary Futures, the ICDF on campus, because we are looking at how we can preserve our languages. The Digital Scholarship Centre, the library is doing amazing work on preservation of our languages as well. So this is the way we can disseminate. I know through the Language Committee that amazing work is being done, translating, for example, abstracts from master's and PhD dissertations into Sesotho, for example. So that's a start, but only a start. And I want to say one more thing, which might kind of not tie in so much with this, but it is important. When we translate our languages and we use AI translation tools, that's great. But to keep our languages alive, we have to go beyond language, linguistics. So if, for example, just a quick pop quiz, I had to ask you, you're walking down the pavement of a street, and there's a shop on the left-hand side, and it says baby and toddler sale. What comes to mind when I say baby and toddler sale? What are you thinking about? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear baby clothes. So how come you know I'm not speaking about selling babies? Okay? In other words, preserving our languages goes beyond linguistics. It's about nuance and context. I know that there's a journalist some years ago who was tasked with writing an article, I think in isiZulu, on a new fossil find in the country. And for the life of him, he could not find the equivalent in isiZulu. It took him a long time. He used Google Translate, which completely mangled it. So what does it illustrate? It illustrates that it's not just about a language. We can spit out words, we can generate them, but what about context? Context counts. Register, whether it's formal, informal, slang or not. So these are all the things we need to think when we are collating data and trying to preserve as well as promote our languages. And that's it from me, very short and sweet.
Thank you very much, Prof. That was also very, very challenging because you give us a whole perspective around AI and the integration of these languages that we think are leaving behind, and the stats from the UN and so forth and so on. Thank you very much. And in the interest of time, I would like to invite Ms. Nikiwe Matebula on what role really does national and provincial institutions like PENSALB play in holding universities or institutions accountable for the development of multilingual language policies, especially on the part of implementation, and how these policies really can advance issues of linguistic injustices and language rights. Over to you.
Dumelang. Goeiedag. Sanbonani. Ka lebitso ke Nikiwe Matebula, jwalo ka se ke tsebisitswe. My name is Nikiwe Matebula, as introduced. I am from the Pan South African Language Board, and I will not assume that everyone knows what the Pan South African Language Board is. As the Language Board, we are responsible to promote multilingualism, and we are established in line with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, as mentioned, that from the Constitution, it was decided, since we come from a policy where there were only 2 languages, now we are a multilingual country, and there should be 12 official languages now. And the Pan South African Language Board is an institution to ensure that all these languages are promoted and to hold government institutions and academic institutions accountable in terms of multilingualism. So in short, that is what we stand for as a language board. And we always pleased when we attend sessions of this nature, where we see banners, where we see different languages. Usually, you know, everything is written in English. And as a language board, we say, I have a dream. Where in future, when there is a session of this nature, everyone can express themselves in their home language. When we talk about multilingualism, that's the first step. So, ebang re tlo bua ka dipuo, re bua ka dipuo tse fapaneng, empa re sebedisa puo e nngwe, la e bona jwang akere. So if we speak of multilingualism, and yet we speak one language, discussing multilingualism, it's already a problem. So that's what we've always established as the language board. Even in our own meetings, where we flaunt, we are able to see that. Even in our sessions, that's where we try, whenever we have community engagements, we engage them in their own language. So the MEC of the department, can I please translate that? Can you imagine me being in Kwakwa and addressing the community in English? It doesn't work. So the MEC of the Department of Sport, Arts, Culture and Recreation, who's responsible for promoting multilingualism in the Free State Province, once even admitted to say, I went to some region in Kwakwa and they said, Bua Sesotho mme. And the community member said, speak Sesotho. We are Sesotho speakers, you can speak Sesotho, can you please address us in our own language? So there's no need in a South African context where people always have to make such a request so that they are addressed in their home languages in South African context. So what we do as a language board to hold institutions accountable, we are given the power to make recommendations and to advise. So usually that's where our power ends. And then we also found it to be a problem or a challenge in terms of the Constitution that it ends there. What if our recommendations are not, implemented and our advice is not taken into task? So that's when we have made a recommendation as we speak that our powers should be more than that, so that with other institutions we can also penalize. Because if we make a recommendation to say, at this university, can we also have, for example, isiXhosa as an official language? And the university, uses these escape clauses to say, no, it's not practical, or there's still an issue with funding, etc., etc., then usually it ends there. But if we really find out there are enough Xhosa students at this university that the language can be an official language of that school, then we can penalize such an institution for not implementing. So at present, we make recommendations, we give advice with the Language Academy for Multilingualism. We've worked very well in terms of also advising that we expedite the process of ensuring that we have more terminology projects in Sesotho. It has started very well, and the process is moving, yet not at a fast pace as we would like. But usually language change takes time. It's not easy just to get it started and then it moves at speed. So that is our role as the language board, to make those recommendations and advice. And in terms of students, I think you must also understand it's also your role to ensure that these languages are used and are promoted. We also have a unit that we call linguistic human rights. Whenever you feel that your rights are being violated, that's when you can come to the language board and indicate that you requested certain information in your own language, and according to the language policy, your language is also accommodated in that institution, and you should receive information in your own language. Then you can come and complain that that is not being done. Then that's how we can hold different institutions accountable. In some institutions, there is terminology. It's lying somewhere in a certain unit. It's not accessible to students online. It's not accessible in different classes. That's when students can make us aware as a language board to say, we have this challenge. And as activists, you should be your own activists as language users to make demands regarding the promotion of your own languages, because no one is going to do that for you. And we've also been very much aware of this Xhosa Student Association. I'm not sure if it's represented. Yes, the Sesotho Student Association, Setswana Student Association. Then that's how you actively participate. You don't just say, but my language is not represented. You also stand up and represent your own language. So we're very pleased with that active role that the students are playing, and recommendations that you have as students to say, this is how we want our language to be promoted. Then you can approach the language board, and that's how we can assist you to ensure that your languages at academic institutions are also promoted. So please don't just fold your arms and expect all the work to be done by the Academy for Multilingualism or other departments within the university. You as students as well should participate and make such recommendations. Then that's how we can assist, and that's how we can hold academic institutions accountable. There was an instance with one academic institution where there was a deaf student, but there was no interpreting. Then the deaf student was able to approach the language board to say, this is a specific situation that is happening within the academic institution. We are excluded on the basis of language. And we then are able to approach the academic institution to ensure that there is such interpreting services, to ensure that the students are accommodated in their own languages. So over and above, in terms of terminology verification and authentication, we ensure that the quality of the terms, as we have worked with Dr. Tadi and the academy, to ensure that it's of good quality, because usually you'd find when it's written in English, everything is perfect, but when it comes to the translation, there are usually challenges. So that's where we ensure the issue of quality control. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much on that part. Yeah, I'm learning today that there is somewhere that the power ends. Power ends. From what you were saying, like, we do have a role to play to hold institutions accountable, but our power ends. I'm learning that for the first time, that power does end somewhere, all right? I think we've had at least a picture of or the responses, if you want, from the panelists. I want to open up questions now. In the interest of time, I'll take only 3 sets, and 3 sets of hands, right? Because sometimes we may have questions that are duplicating, right? So, wait. So the questions we can take 3 hands this side, in this middle, and then on my far left. That's correct English, ne? Far left. It's not far, but here. All right? So, questions, please. Questions, and you've heard from our panelists and from the keynote address that we've had, from a very theoretical presentation to a very practical presentation also from the keynote. So we'll open up those questions now, and then I think we'll have a roving mic somewhere this side, and somewhere this side, and somewhere here. Without wasting any more time, if you have a question, I'm not saying that, I'm not devaluing our traditions, that you go straight to the point, right? But if there's a question, don't go to history, have that question, shoot it straight. And please identify who that person should respond to that question. Who is that particular individual you are directing that? If it is to me, you must say it's me, program director, right? Without any waste of time, this side, do you have any questions? Not now. I don't want to say they are not there, but not now. This side, any questions? Interesting. Far left, any questions? Okay, at least there's one hand. Do you have a mic?
Program Director, can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
If they have questions in their own languages, let them say, and then we'll help translate it.
Yeah, so Dr. Tad is suggesting that you can ask a question in a language of your choice. Yes. Are there any questions? Questions in a language of your choice? Okay, we have one.
Dumelang.
Dumelang.
Poto yaka is for Dr. Florence Study. I relate mostly with Sesotho as a language and the concept of the power of the tongue. So the question is, how does societal perception of languages impact students' relationships with their tongue, which means their language? Simple. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll take the second one before you can respond. Repeat the question. Please repeat the question.
The question was, how does societal perception of languages impact students' relationships with them? Yes.
So good day. Everyone is so everyone is more than welcome to answer my question. So it's very simple. It is clear and evident that someone is against multilingualism. So my question is, what are the disadvantages and critics of multilingualism? Thank you so much.
No other question. I think before we forget that question, Dr. Tadi, maybe you can respond.
Thank you so much for the question. And as a clinical psychologist, I'm trying to understand your question very well so that I can do justice to my response. Because the question is about this community's perception about the language. Yeah. Sure. And I'm going to try to answer this question. And most probably from a psychological point of view, if I need to create a context. I assume that our communities, when they view us as learned individuals, it always creates a barrier for them. As many have said, that when we come to them, we tend to interact with them in a foreign language. I think that makes our community to have a negative perception to education. And I think I've heard most older people saying that education ena re lahlelwa ke bana ba rona. Bana ba rona ba re lahlehelwa, ka ba lahlehela. And I think in promoting or reigniting our own indigenous language, we might connect with our communities much better. And I think they're gonna start valuing English. Not English, I mean education. Because they will realize that education doesn't mean you lose your identity. Because I think there's a perception that education makes us lose our identity. And that's my attempt to answer your question. I hope I have
done justice. Thank you, Dr. Tadi. But we had another, the second question was for everyone excluding myself. So we can start from my right, Bishop. So can you repeat the question? Can you repeat the question? Just.
I check.
Okay, it's gone.
It's fine. So my question was, clearly there's someone who's against multilingualism. So I was saying, what are the disadvantages and some of the critiques of promoting multilingualism? Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you again. Over to you, Bishop.
What a difficult question. But I'll try to say many a times language gets politicized. And some people think that if you become multilingual, you lose who you are. And unfortunately, people are mobilized and organized around language and culture because that serves many political agendas. To say you are Zulu, therefore Zulus must support a Zulu. You are English, you are that, you are that. But the reality of the context in which we live, all of us need to be multilingual because the world is becoming globalized. You are working with different people. So specifically, I won't say this person or that, but I think in politics I've seen, and I grew up in political environments, people use language to exclude and to mobilize others, and then therefore sometimes obstruct multilingualism because they see it as a threat of trying to control certain people.
Are you okay? Yeah, I don't know if there are any disadvantages to multilingualism from, my perspective. I think Bishop Billyboy has highlighted why some people might be opposed to multilingual. I think it's a fear-based thing. I mean, we've spoken about epistemological access, things like that. I think even, neurologically, studies have shown that children who grow up multilingual, there's so many benefits to your ability to think, mathematically, numbers, patterns. So it's advantages to multilingualism. Just to answer your question of what are the disadvantages, I can't think of any.
Like the latter speaker has just indicated, I also don't think there are disadvantages. It's more of an advantage, and I think that's why I said that it's about time that we start viewing multilingualism as power, as the theme of the day suggests. I don't know if you've ever heard of, say for instance, I'm Khomotso, I like making practical experience, my practical experiences examples. I'm Khomotso, I'm from the Northwest, we speak Setswana, right? I come in the Free State, and I'm faced with many Sotho-speaking people. I need to adapt, right? I go back home, and they hear bits and hints of Sesotho. The first thing that they say is, "O tjhakile ka leleme," right? So there's stereotypes within our communities, and I think this is one of the disadvantages really that are posing multilingualism. That you get a perception that maybe you're losing a sense of self, as it was indicated that, oh, I went to Free State, I'm speaking Sotho now, I'm losing touch with my Tswana self. But it also, as I did say, that we should now start viewing it as power, because say for instance you get a job opportunity in the Eastern Cape or in the KZN, you're a Tswana speaking person predominantly, and you get there, you get to interact with different communities that speak isiXhosa or isiZulu, and you can't respond to such. So I think then it's about time that we start viewing it as power, as I have indicated. Thank you.
One, two, thanks. You know, if you think of that response, and as we understand it, I mean, I think we are on the same page that multilingualism, one, is a resource. So you are so resourceful if you can speak 2, 3, and many languages. And can I also mention that you are a true South African if you speak many languages, right? So we speak of being resourceful, and you have that attribute of being, a resourceful person, because you are able to cut across, but also understanding that language is very much connected to culture. So if you understand isiZulu, for example, the advantage here as we speak, the people who have full understanding of isiZulu, who are Zulu speakers, they have the advantage of speaking other Nguni languages within that cluster. You can speak isiXhosa fluently because there's a degree of mutual intelligibility.
What is called additive multilingualism and subtractive bilingualism. These are difficult things. And then, so I don't want to add more things on what has been said. But I think what we are taking away from the whole discussion and from the questions that have been posed to the panelists is that we can agree that multilingualism is important, right? 2, multilingualism is a resource, right? 3, multilingualism is a resource, right? We have agreed to that one. The 4th one is multilingualism is a resource. I want us to be clear on that one, right? The last one, which is the 5th one, as I read here, is that multilingualism is a resource. Without even having to talk about the historical prejudices that have happened in the past, I think we have an agreement. Despite that the Constitution is a problem, multilingualism, I'll hand over, we'll do a group photo, and then I think we'll have a photo with, yes. Don't worry. Because we have agreed that also someone lost their phone. I think they left it in the bathroom. But you see, we understand that you were rushing to come to the event. So we found it. I think you can engage one of the colleagues here to come take it. All right? And then without any further ado, I want to call Ms. Dlamini to come and offer us a vote of thanks.
Thank you. Am I audible?
You are.
Oh, what a informative session. Thank you very much, colleagues. Firstly, I'd like to thank the panelists here for availing yourselves. It was really a great, informative session. Prof, thank you very, very, very much. Guys, can you please give Professor Khalakale a round of applause for making time during your busy schedule to join us. We really do appreciate that. I'd like to thank Professor Anthea Roda in her absence and the entire university for and assistance in making sure that we implement the language policy and supporting the Academy for Multilingualism at all times. Dr. Ngubani, thank you very much for your leadership at all times. Dr. Hlongwa, for traveling all the way here and making sure that you're here to support us. We really do appreciate your presence here with us. The AFM team, Ivodia, Tato, thank you very much, colleagues, for your hard work in making sure that we have this wonderful and beautiful event here. Can you please give them a round of applause? Our service providers, thank you very much for your support, the high quality work that you provide to us at all times. Thank you very much. Give them a round of applause. Program Direct, Ntate Motau, ke a leboha haholo ntate. I'll thank you before you thank yourself. I know you. So great job, thank you very much. You kept us entertained, rejuvenated. And lastly, I want to thank you guys, our students. Thank you very much for being here with us.